Dr. Stephanie Pace Marshall is the founding president and chief executive officer of the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy in Aurora. The academy, which opened in 1986, was created by the Illinois General Assembly. Its two charges to offer a uniquely challenging education for Illinois students in grades 10 through 12 who are talented in the areas of mathematics and science, and to serve the school system of the state of Illinois as a catalyst and laboratory for the advancement of teaching. This academy is unique to Illinois and one of only a few of its kind in the country. We're talking with Dr. Marshall on her induction into the Lincoln Academy of Illinois, the state's highest honor for individual achievement. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise, Jack.
Like to start at the beginning, a little bit of background about you personally. Your father was a scientist, as I understand, and your mother was a special education teacher.
Right.
So the branch might have been bent a certain way right from the beginning with you.
Well, I was fortunate to have been, had grown up in New York. I was born in the Bronx, and then moved to Long Island when I was in third grade. But my father was a nuclear engineer, and prior to becoming a special ed teacher, my mother was actually a teacher of autistic schizophrenic children. She was a singer and a dancer. So I have always viewed myself as what I have called a child of the center. I grew up with erector sets and music, and taking apart cars and dolls. So I was so fortunate to be in a home that really integrated from the very beginning math and science and art and humanities and music. And of course, growing up in New York, which was a museum in and of itself, I had an unusual but very rich background.
And here it all comes together.
And here it all comes together, right.
What led you into the field of education, though? You could have gone a lot of different ways.
I could have, and originally I had thought that I might be interested in being a surgeon. I also had toyed with thoughts of the ministry. And I chose education because watching my mother and her passion for creating conditions that would really invite kids into possibilities that other people thought were impossible. I saw my mother as a miracle worker. She very deliberately created conditions for kids, again, autistic schizophrenic children, where people said it was not possible for them to do certain things. I went and observed her classes, and they could do things that others thought were impossible. And so I saw teaching as a way that if one watched and paid attention and listened to the children and knew as much as you could know about learning and the conditions that invited and make potential more likely to emerge, you could change the world.
What was the academic path you decided to follow?
It was eclectic. So my bachelor's degree was in sociology and anthropology. My master's was in curriculum and philosophy. My PhD was in organizational design and development. And so it's what you said before. In this place, I mean, I've had wonderful experiences along the way, but in this place, the paths converge.
No doubt about that. You came to Illinois in 1967,
right?
To teach not too far from here, as I understand it.
It's in Alsip, Illinois, 5th grade, 1967. That's right. And
you started climbing up the rungs of the academic ladder in terms of administration along the way.
That's how other people saw it. I didn't see it that way. I just saw it as opportunities for greater and greater influence, and so I taught elementary school for 4 years, and I moved to the junior high, became a department chairman in social science and the director of the district's gifted program, then moved into administration in Naperville, then administration again in curriculum instruction and assessment, special ed and gifted education in Batavia, then became superintendent of Batavia, and then came to EMSA in 1986.
How did those experiences, in both classroom teaching and in educational administration, shape your educational worldview?
Well, all of those things. It wasn't only teaching, but along the way, because my mother said some very important things to me when I was just a very little girl, like, you must always belong to the world. I remember her telling me that when I was very young. and if there's going to be an exception, it might as well be you. I started on pathways that were simply questions of interest to me. Well, I always viewed learning as the great leveler. And so while other people might be intimidated by famous people, I used to call them up, even as a little girl, with great regularity after I read their book to find out why they wrote what they wrote. So I always saw learning as an entree, and that took me into national and international leadership positions. I became the president of the largest educational association in the world, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, did a lot of travel, joined the State of the World Forum, joined the Royal Society in London. So it wasn't only the formal roles I had, but was because I was so just insatiably curious and decided that wherever I had a question, I had to go find the answer, and the people who had the answer, I found lots of really interesting pathways. And that brought me to a worldview that is essentially a very simple one, that mind shaping is world shaping, and that schooling is all about creating conditions that make the nurturance of certain kinds of minds and habits of thinking more likely.
Does that clash at sometimes with the traditional models we...
It clashes every moment with the traditional model, because the traditional model is more about memory and acquisition and complete isolation or independence. It's about competition. Here, and what we have been trying to do in sort of my own views, again, starting from the time I was just a little girl, it's all about meaning. It's about inquiry. It's about collaboration. It's about construction. It's about exploration. It's very different than, unfortunately, the conditions that are created in many schools in the United States and in the Western world.
Is it fair to say that you were looking for an opportunity to put some of this to work in a brand new arena?
I wasn't really looking for an opportunity. I mean, Batavia was a remarkable school district, and we were able to do some really neat things there. But I think my attraction to EMSA, it was one of those invitations you can't refuse, even though almost everyone I spoke to in the field of education told me never to come here, that it would be the end of my career. I was on a trajectory that people thought I should stay on. I was a superintendent. I was young. I was a female. There weren't female superintendents at that time, other than Ruth Love in Chicago. And that getting off this for a very untested institution that may not survive was simply not a very wise move. So I wasn't looking for this opportunity, but having gotten the invitation, I realized that there were synergies and serendipities here, that my work had been gifted and talented. I was in a program very much like EMSA. I spoke the language of science. I spoke the language of social science and music and art and poetry, and that's what we wanted EMSA to do. So this was just a confluence and a very rare opportunity for an educator to work with other remarkable educators to create something from scratch.
Now, there's obviously a series of steps that had to take place before EMSA became what it is today, before it began working its way through the legislative process down in Springfield. The governor at the time, Governor Jim Thompson, saw this as a critical issue, but I'm sure there were people who brought that issue to his attention there in the governor's office. Professor Leon Lederman, Nobel Prize laureate, I believe. He had a key stake in the beginning of this place. He was.
I think it's probably fair to say that he was the prime mover. He was the director of Fermilab at the time. Fermilab was in the Batavia School District. I was told that he gave a stirring speech in 1983 that Illinois needs to do something about the development of talent in math, science, and technology. Several people who were in that, who heard his speech, called me and said, Letterman has come up with an idea, and it's right up your alley. You need to call him. So I called him essentially and said, if you're serious about creating an institution like this, I'm not a mathematician or a scientist, but I do know how to create innovative learning environments, and I will be your partner. And so Leon then connected to the governor. There's a long story of EMSA, but it started in this part of Illinois with a group called the Valley Industrial Association. Key legislative leaders and business leaders were then enrolled. One of those key leaders was Dennis Hastert, who remains a strong advocate and supporter and friend of EMSA. But to say it was a grassroots effort, I think is really true. Leon, of course, was absolutely essential. He had the credentials to say to a governor, we must do this in Illinois. This was not the first time this had been done in the country. The North Carolina School of Math and Science was the first. So while we had a model, and we used that in terms of understanding how you could create statewide institutions, I think it's fair to say that EMSA has created its own unique identity and brand for how you develop talent leadership in math, science, and technology.
I think it's probably also a good idea to talk about the backdrop of the times. In the early 1980s,
yes.
the United States was seen as losing a lot of the intellectual capital wars, if you will. That's probably
exactly
not the best way I'd put that, but we were behind in a lot of areas, and we were getting deeply concerned that we would lose our scientific and scientific edge, our edge in mathematics and technology, and there were dire economic and national defense issues at issue at the time. Illinois is a major industrial state, and there's an economic concern here as well when you think about that, and I'm sure that caught Jim Thompson's attention.
Well, Jim Thompson is, of course he is a statesman, and in some ways a quintessential politician, but he understood education and learning fundamentally, and what it means to develop talent on behalf of economic development of the state of Illinois. Your comment about the timing is really interesting, because A Nation at Risk, which was a very scathing report under the auspices of the Reagan administration, more or less said that the country was at risk in losing its talent in math, science, and technology, and we needed to do something. And Illinois then, to its credit and to the credit of the governor and the members of the General Assembly at the time, I think took a very bold step to create the Illinois Math and Science Academy. But there was that time where everybody in the country was now paying attention, and in the mid-50s, it was called the National Defense Education Act, and it was for math, science, and technology. That was the program that I was in as a young student who had was immersed in math and science during that period of time for that very reason.
It must have been an exciting time to start putting all the building blocks for this place together. How did you begin assembling a cadre of instructors and the talented faculty that you would have to have here, and then basically the philosophical underpinnings of the place as well?
Well, we started when it was clear that there was momentum and that there was a seriousness of purpose on behalf of the governor to really look at this. We needed a proposal. And Dr. Lennerman convened a steering group in 1983, and I co-chaired that. And we brought in leaders in math and science and technology and education, political leaders, governmental leaders, and we crafted during that 1983 St. Charles conference an actual proposal for EMSA. And then I took that proposal, and given the role that I was playing currently in the Batavia School District as a leader in curriculum and also my statewide contacts, we began just enrolling people who were interested in deepening that proposal. That sort of, the word got out. I mean, we were not being bashful. The word got out. We started talking with people about possibilities, and a lot of people just called. I mean, this was a new venture. The pioneers were out there, the explorers were out there, the people who had been frustrated, who wanted to do something new, and the ones who knew that there was a better way to educate children started calling us. And so we really didn't have a huge recruitment effort, although of course we were advertising. But we got our cadre of people who really were, I would call them pioneers, because that's what they were in the beginning.
it's you were able to assemble really the cream of the crop.
Absolutely.
Not only in terms of faculty, but people you could draw upon from nearby. You're in the intellectual heart of the state, and in many ways the country here. With the University of Chicago, Argonne National Lab, Fermi Lab.
And that's part of, I mean, those institutions have not only become, in terms of the university's recipients, I mean, a lot of our kids go to those places, but they became critical in terms of our mentorship and research program. Our kids are actually in those sites doing very significant research.
Let's talk about the kids. We need to talk about the kids.
They're the heart of everything.
Who's able to come here, and what do they do?
They have to, well, this is an institution for kids of talent in math, science, and technology. Kids who have a passion for math and science, who are really motivated to study math and science, and who likely will go into a career in math and science. Any student in Illinois who can be eligible, depending upon their background and their interests and motivation and their talent. They have to take the SAT. They have to get recommendations from a math teacher, a science teacher, a counselor, a principal, a writing teacher. They have to fill out the application. Kids come from all over the state of Illinois. We're in every legislative district. We are United Nations here. We've graduated almost 3,200 kids since the first graduating class of 1989. So this is a place for kids who understand their talent and interest and motivation and desire to excel and study mathematics and science. Half the credits here are in mathematics and science. But it's an integrated environment, as I mentioned before. It's not what I would call an antiseptically rational mathematics and science environment. You've seen the artwork around. The metaphor that we use is a kaleidoscope, which is sort of the quintessential integrator of science and art. And so we're trying to develop very holistic learners, integrative thinkers, kids who not only know math and science, but can connect it to other languages and disciplines as well, but who also have a very strong sense of social service and stewardship for the world. We call ourselves EMSA for the world, and that's what we mean.
And a good appreciation for the good old liberal arts.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When a kid comes to EMSA, what's the academic experience going to be like? How's it going to differ from what they had maybe in their high school back downstate or another part of the state of Illinois?
It's a great question, because in the first probably 6 months, there is a great unlearning process that goes on when kids come here. It may be an equivalent of an intellectual or academic boot camp in the sense that they have to, in many ways, unlearn the traditional ways of schooling. We say that kids come here extremely adept at knowing how to do school. They know how to write the papers, they know how to get the A's, they know how to psych out the questions, they know exactly what to do. And for many of them, school has been very easy. EMSA is about learning. It's about deep conceptual understanding. It's about connecting concepts in one discipline with those in another. It's about research. It's about framing a question. It's about reading a first-hand material and then saying, what did the author really mean by that? How might I explore that more deeply? It's not about what I would call shallow learning, which often kids like this experience because they're so bright. They know how to very quickly ace out the teacher or the paper. Here, we expect them to deeply learn and to think and to ask questions and to frame problems. It's a different orientation, and they have to learn how to do that.
You challenge them through problem-based learning.
Yeah.
They have to apply some intellectual rigor and some imagination to the classroom work.
That's exactly right. Problem-based learning is a pedagogy that we did not develop, but we went to we went to Southern Illinois because they use that in their medical school. Howard Barrows was probably our guru, but that came from Canada. Problem-based learning is a curriculum and a way of teaching where kids are immersed in ill-structured, very messy problems for which there is no simple resolution. They have to examine first-hand data, frame the question, decide the multiple parameters that a question, that resolving the question would take. So they look at the scientific implications, the ethical implications, the moral implications, the historical implications, multiple ways of what a complex problem really involves. In the real world, you are not told this is a chemistry problem or this is an ethics problem. You're told here's a problem. And then they have to resolve it, working in teams. And then we bring in experts in the field to listen to their resolution and to push back at them. So it's tremendous experience in immersing themselves in how the real world works.
You have many PhDs on the faculty here,
yep.
But who else might the kids have an opportunity to interact with from nearby universities and and science and industry where there's applied research being done?
Well, about 45% of our faculty have their PhDs. Everyone has a master's degree, so the faculty is a remarkable, unique group. Dr. Letterman, through his work in creating what we call the Great Minds Program, has brought in well over 50 renowned individuals in mathematics, in science, in music, in the arts. We had the Poet Laureate of the United States. We've had resident artists, musicians. So they have exposure to simply remarkable people, largely through Leon's context, but not exclusively through Leon's context. We are very networked, and one of the things that we say to our kids is, when you come to the Illinois Math and Science Academy, we will honor your dreams. We want you to dream big. We want to create conditions that help you realize those dreams and take them as far as you can. And if that means you want to meet Rosa Parks, who came here many years ago, we're going to try to create conditions to make that possible for you.
Or rub elbows with Sally Wright.
Who came here as well, that's
exactly.
Right.
Let's talk about the success to this point. A lot of the students have gone on now into, they've finished their baccalaureates, moved on to masters, to PhDs, and I imagine some are postdoctoral and beyond.
Right, right. We have a wonderful, quite humbling list, I think, of alum, but just to name a couple. Scott Gowdy, who, as you mentioned, postdoc at the Smithsonian in astrophysics, has done remarkable work in astronomy and cosmology, and I believe has just discovered a moon that no one had discovered before. Josh Gerlich opened the NASDAQ last year. He is the president and CEO of a company called EAD Devices, biotech company, where he's developed a needle that will really help in treating and identifying breast cancer. Beth Malika is a Top Gun. She may be the first female Top Gun in the United States Air Force. That's just a smattering, and of course probably one of the most famous of the McCool brothers, who actually were two of the 5 people that created Netscape at the University of Illinois, and they claim that they started it here. But they're just 4 of, as I said, almost 3,200 graduates.
The Academy's charge, of course, goes beyond teaching students.
Yes.
The influence is enormous out in the school systems of Illinois because of the way that you do science teaching and teaching science teachers to teach science.
That's exactly right.
Trying to find a better way to put that.
Right.
But I'll ask that again. The Academy's charge is twofold, actually, though. It's not only for the students who come here, but for science teachers around the state of Illinois. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we have created a center for the advancement of teaching and learning. That's the other part of the Illinois Math and Science Academy. As you well know, our legislation is very clear that we have a dual mission. One is to work with kids of unusual talent, and we've spoken about them, and the other is to serve as a catalyst to stimulate excellence in math and science throughout the state of Illinois. Within our center programs, we have 2 categories of programs. One, student enrichment, and we have unique programs starting in 3rd grade. Grades 3 through 5, grades 6 through 8, an after-school middle school program, and then programs for older kids as well. We've served about 3,400 students in the 19 years that we have been in existence in a multiple number of student enrichment programs. The teaching programs focus on problem-based learning. They focused on information literacy, and as you said, they focused on teaching science and mathematics, but also other disciplines as well, because PBL is one of those integrating pedagogies that science teachers, math teachers, history teachers can all be working on. We've served about 18,000 teachers in the last 19 years.
If I'm a middle school science teacher in Murfreesboro, Illinois, or Moline, or Kankakee, how could I take advantage of the services here?
Well, through your school district. Sometimes we have contracts with school districts. We actually come down and do workshops within the district. Some of our student programs are also professional development programs, and you can access those on our website. We have a full menu of the courses and professional development opportunities that you can have for students. We run the Illinois Virtual High School for the state of Illinois, so while that is currently mostly for students, we will be using that for professional development as well. People come here from all over the state, all over the country, and literally all over the world. We get thousands of visitors a year. And so teachers from Murfreesboro or wherever can always come up, sit in on classes, talk to teachers, interact with our staff at the center and beyond. So we try to be as available as we can because we were created by the state of Illinois to serve the interests of the state of Illinois and beyond. But we really do want to serve science and math teachers and technology leaders in the state.
Well, we've already gone just about a half an hour, but I've got a couple more questions for you. How has EMSA impacted education policy in the state of Illinois? There obviously, I know you get a lot of phone calls from people about things, but there are obviously policy issues down in Springfield. You have the state superintendent of education on the board of EMSA, so I'm sure there's a lot of interplay back and forth.
Well, it's a great question and a really important question. I think probably our policy initiatives come from what we name and articulate as critical ingredients for education. So EMSA had community service long before it became a state requirement. Whether, could I claim that was because of the Illinois Math and Science Academy? Perhaps not. But the fact that we had it and we made that known, I think probably had an influence. Clearly, we have policy leadership at the Illinois Virtual High School. That's a major component. We've expanded that from high school to elementary school, and as I say now, in terms of professional development. Our work in problem-based learning, I think, has also had huge policy implications because people are beginning to recognize that learning is all about engagement, that learning is all about inquiry, and problem-based learning through the books that we have written, which we have, 2 books in problem-based learning, the workshops that we have conducted. It gives people and teachers an opportunity to really learn a pedagogy and a skill that they can apply to change their practice. That's probably the biggest policy, is really changing practice. We are members of the National Education Technology Consortium and have influenced national policy and technology. Many of us have, as I mentioned, have been leadership in the Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development and have changed national policy as a result of that. In science, we have collaborated with the American Association for the Advancement of Science in a book on advanced study in American high schools, and I think played a significant role in that text, which is now considered almost a Bible for advanced study in math, science, and technology. So in a lot of different ways, in what we write, in our speaking, and in our practice.
So well beyond Illinois, there's definitely on the national stage as well.
And I should mention that there are 3 international schools of math and science that have been modeled after EMSA. One in Israel, one in Jordan, one in Australia. We have some students coming from South Korea. We have a partnership with the Busan Academy in South Korea. So EMSA, while I think 20 years ago it might have been envisioned as a small institution just helping the students and teachers of Illinois, which of course is critical, we've expanded. And last year, Worth Magazine and the Wall Street Journal said we were one of the top high schools in the nation.
No doubt. No institution as vital as this can ever stay static.
Right.
It's always going to be a work in progress, right. I'm sure. Look down the road 10 years. What do you want to see happening here and happening because of a place like EMSA?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I think for our kids, and this is not unique to EMSA, but I think we are in a unique capacity to implement it perhaps more quickly. Education, especially in high school, is moving to a much more personalized level. So I'd like to see us, where a student comes in here and says, I understand the core curriculum of EMSA, I understand where you want me to be, I want to demonstrate my competency when I am ready, and then I want to spend 6 weeks in CERN in Switzerland studying with this famous scientist, or I want to spend 6 months. I want to create an environment for kids where they are fearless learners, and that we create conditions for them to learn anything they want to learn when they're in the purview of the Illinois Math and Science Academy. I hope that EMSA programs and materials are in school districts around the state. We have a unique partnership now with St. Charles, who has adopted one of our mathematics curriculums, Math Investigations. Their board has adopted it last year, and I hope more of EMSA materials, that they're packaged and they're adopted by school districts. So they not only have the materials, but they have the benefit of our professional development. I want to see us have a greater role in policy, both at the national and international level.
One can't be as closely aligned with an institution as this, as you have been, without having been changed some personally. How has your experience here changed you over the years?
I think it has reinforced what perhaps was viewed to be a naive or Pollyanna perspective about the unknowable potentials that we possess as human beings. I held that from a very early age. What EMSA has done is simply reinforce that every single day. The truth of the matter is we have no idea how smart we are, and children have no idea how they are smart. What EMSA has done is recognize through lots of diagnosis, but also our attentiveness to learners, where kids have their talents, and create conditions that enable them to connect. So I suppose it's not really being changed, but just reinforcing the fact that we put too many constraints on our children's learning, and schooling and learning has to be all about lifting boundaries and giving kids the opportunity to really to become all that they can be. It sounds like a cliche, but I'll go back to the statement, we have no idea how smart we are. Mind shaping is world shaping.
There are decidedly different minds.
There are decidedly different minds.
To borrow from the title of your new book.
That's right.
and I imagine a lot of that is embraced and espoused in the book.
Yes, the book, it's a radical new story of learning and schooling, and radical means fundamental and at the root. Doesn't mean inflammatory. But I want to go back to the roots of what learning is, and learning is all about the personal construction of meaning. It's not about just memorizing something from somebody else, and so that's what we're about here.
One final question. What's been the greatest satisfaction about this role for you?
The capacity to be the inquiring learner that I am. This is an environment where the roles that we play or assume, whether it's the president or the principal or whatever, in some ways are secondary. Everyone here is invited to be a learner, and it's a safe place to ask the questions and to behave with a beginner's mind. And that's been the most satisfying, that I can be a learner here in ways that I was when I went to the University of Chicago and Loyola. And that's unusual in a professional environment.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
We appreciate our time here with you.
Delighted to speak with you.